Welcome to the Ducks Unlimited podcast, the only podcast about all things waterfowl. From hunting insights to science-based discussions about ducks, geese, and issues affecting waterfowl and wetlands conservation in North America, we bring the resource to you. The DU Podcast with your hosts, Chris Jennings and Dr. Mike Brasher.
Today I've got my co-host and Dr. Mike Brasher with me. How are you, Mike?
I'm doing well, Chris. It's good to be back with you again on this show.
And today we are going to provide a quick little recap of Season 2, the off-season. You know, we launched the off-season the first week of May. A little bit slower pace of content than what we had done in Season 1. But we brought some awesome content to you, and we kind of want to talk about what we're going to do for Season 3. So let's wrap up Season 2 with a quick recap from Mike.
What I will say is that Season 2, like everything else that's been happening this time of year, this year has been really strange. When did we start? We started in like March, something like that, didn't we? We did our first, or maybe it was April. It took us a while to get up and running, and we all started working remotely. And, you know, I guess the first thing that we need to do is give big kudos to our producer, Clay Baird. Everything that has changed about what we do has put additional pressure on Clay. Everything is going virtual now, and all of his other responsibilities have kind of almost like doubled. And so that the same thing with this podcast. It took some additional work to figure out how we were going to do these things remotely and testing out different apps. And we still have some technical challenges with some of these apps. So that was one of the biggest changes, biggest sort of hurdles to overcome, is just figuring out how we were going to do this, a new way of operation, the same way we've had to change pretty much everything else that we do. So I guess I wanted to start out by acknowledging the great work, extra effort that has gone into this, particularly on the part of Clay. But, you know, beyond that, we made it work, and we're able to bring what I thought was some pretty interesting content. We tried out some new things. I know I did, and you did as well, Chris. I particularly liked some of the retriever training shows that you did, the duck calling shows that you did, and some insights on that, you know, based on some of what we're seeing with respect to listener statistics and things of that nature. I think some of those were a pretty big hit. So I guess I would say we hope to continue some of those.
Absolutely. And, you know, one thing, just looking back over all of the technical difficulties and the issues, you know, obviously we didn't have the BPOP survey, but you were able to reach out to your contacts all over the country and in Canada to bring our listeners, you know, these habitat conditions updates. And those are about as real time and about as scientifically based information that you can get anywhere. I mean, we had Scott Stevens from Prairie, Canada, Kelly Rimpel from Saskatchewan. I think we had Ron Mayer from Alberta. And even just recently, we had an update from Johan Walker up in the Great Plains region. And that's the type of information that we're going to continue to do in Season 3 as part of the bonus episodes. They are very popular, and that's the type of content that it seems like, you know, our listeners are really looking for, and we're going to continue to provide that. You know, but along with the content that we have provided in the past, very similar. You know, Mike brings a very science-based conversation to the podcast, and you know, the shows on brood parasitism that, you know, not necessarily something that I thought was going to be wildly popular, but it's one of our better shows throughout the summer. And that's great work on your part.
I can't believe that you even doubted the importance and interest of that topic.
Nice. Yeah, absolutely.
Chris, I'll back up here and say, with respect to some of the surveys and some of the interviews that we tried to bring to the people, one that was particularly, I think, insightful and actually data-based was the one with Mike Zemansky. North Dakota, I think, was the only state, as far as I'm aware, that actually conducted their breeding duck survey. You know, it's also we learned from Mike Zemansky is the longest running breeding duck survey in North America, even longer than the large BPOP survey, May survey that we're all familiar with. And Mike Tamansky was kind enough to spend some time sharing the results of that survey with us. And the results were good for North Dakota. That was the basis of the survey there. But we also heard some good things out of South Dakota. But that was kind of neat to get that piece of data. And like I said, the only piece of data on breeding duck populations that we're going to get this year. We did hear from Ken Richkus, the Fish and Wildlife Service. We certainly appreciated him. That was a challenge to get. I have to kind of relive a little bit of this. We had that show lined up, and I think we had to reschedule that one 2 or 3 times because dealing with the Fish and Wildlife Service and that type of decision making, and they needed some advanced review of kind of what we wanted to talk about, which is completely understandable given given what was causing the cancellation, and we ended up having to reschedule that episode, I think 3 different times, a couple of times at the very last minute. Additional people within the Fish and Wildlife Service said, "Hey, wait a minute, I need to take a look at that." And so I just want to say a big thank you to Ken Richkus for his persistence in sticking with our idea of having him on to talk about the thinking, the logic, and decision making that went behind the cancellation of the BPOP survey. And so this whole time, the summer presented its own, as I said at the outset, unique set of challenges, and there was no really limit to where those challenges stretched. The summer went by quick, I can tell you. Felt like we were going to be able to do a dozen or more of these habitat updates, but we did about 4 or 5 or 6. And then the next thing you know, we're into July, beyond the nesting season, now fully into brood rearing. And just another month and a half from now, we're going to be into the hunting season. So it goes by quick. And I really enjoyed the opportunity, the excuse, you might even say, to stay a bit more up to speed with actually what was happening up there in the prairies. We didn't get as much coverage as we wanted to across all of the U.S. and North America, but we do what we can. So it's been fun.
Yeah, no, and those have been some of our most popular shows. And like I said, like we did in season 1, we're going to continue to bring those real-time habitat updates along with hunting updates. These bonus episodes provide a totally different element to what we can provide from the podcast, and the response has been fantastic. And in conjunction with that, as far as response, I just want to, it's a big shout out to our listeners. The DU podcast has gone over 250,000 downloads through season 2. So, that's a tip of the hat to our listeners and the people out there who are really wanting to engage with the show and hoping to pick up some tidbits of information, whether it be about brood parasitism or duck calling or, even just the habitat updates that we made available. I mean, we greatly appreciate that.
Yeah. And as always, another big thank you to our guest. You and I are just bringing the voices of those guests to the listeners. So you and I kind of have the easy part. I shouldn't say the easy part, but we're the least important in this entire thing, where the guests are the one that bring the information, the real smart people, whether it be brood parasitism, as we were talking about there, or any of the other off-season training skills. And so you and I have the fortune, actually, this is one of the neater aspects of kind of being a co-host, is we get to hear all of this expertise and ask questions and try to be like a sponge, taking it all up while also bringing it out to the listeners. So big thank you to our guest up and down the board for their time. These are all really busy people, and they've been really giving of their time and very supportive of this. And so just make sure we give a big thank you to them.
Be the first to know when ducks are on the move. Sign up for DU's waterfowl migration email alerts and receive ongoing in-depth updates on the latest habitat conditions, weather changes, and hunting reports for your flyway. Visit ducks.org/migration alerts.
Now, Mike, let's go ahead and do a little preview of season 3. We're going to go back to a little bit higher tempo pace of publishing these shows, very similar to what we did in season 1. We've got a sponsor. I'm not going to talk about it quite yet, but we'll announce that when season 3 begins. But talk about some of the shows and some of the people that you talk to, or that you're planning to talk to bring some of this great information to light.
Yeah, some of the shows that we're going to be releasing in the fall, we've already recorded. We kind of have to do that out of necessity because, as you mentioned, the increased volume of shows or number of shows that we're going to be releasing in the fall. There's a couple of them that I'm particularly excited about. One of them is on women in waterfowl. It's a multi-part series. A couple of the guests have been on the show before, but the third person that's going to be a guest of that show is actually the CEO of Ducks Unlimited Canada, Dr. Carla Gwynn. So that was really neat to have her on, a person at that high a leadership position, to have her on and get her insights on this very important topic, the trend of women in the waterfowl profession. We also talked a little bit about women in waterfowl hunting. So I know that's going to be of broad interest to our audience. We're also going to have some conversations about Delta Marsh. That's a place that has rich history in waterfowl, and I was excited to talk to some folks about that. One of the other topics that I'll mention here relates to some listener comments that we received. It revolves around what's happening with eastern mallards. This is a 3-part series. It was a bear to edit and a bear to record. We actually had to record that entire thing over. It was like 2.5 hours. I sat down with Dr. Tom Mormon, our chief scientist, and Dr. Phil Lavretsky, and we recorded it for like 2.5 hours. The audio wasn't good enough, so we had to go back and do it all over again. So, and then I know Clay had a heck of a time.
Yeah, I think I remember seeing an email about that episode from our awesome producer, Clay, and I think it just said, "I quit."
That's right. He had a heck of a time editing those shows. And so, again, kudos to Clay for that. But that's a really interesting conversation, and it falls in line with the article that Dr. Lavretsky authored. It was in a earlier issue of the DU magazine. Some people had asked us to help cover that topic on the podcast. And so we're going to be, that'll be coming out this fall as well. And a number of other topics that are similar to the ones that we did, similar in theme to what we did in the previous year. But also, I think we're going to be trying some new things, maybe with some different guests and different topics. And so there's really no shortage of the variety that we can bring to this. Chris, you and I not being in the office together for the past several months, or ever since the COVID situation developed, I don't know what you've been thinking about, what kind of shows and themes and topics you're lining up for the fall. Anything of that nature that you can share?
I was just going to let you handle the whole season 3, Mike.
Yeah, we need to talk about that then.
No, I've got some great things planned, some great guests, some guests we've had on in the past, some new ones. It's going to be hunting season, so everyone's going to be fired up, me included in that. So obviously, duck calling, got some retriever training stuff in the can already. Got some really great shows from Phil Bergeli, Ducks Unlimited magazine, shotgunning columnist. We just recently did one on goose guns, which I think our audience is really going to get into. Our listeners will love it because, Phil, who's such a great guest and a knowledgeable shotgunning enthusiast, he gets into his passion for 10 gauges, which is, something that, you don't really hear a lot about. And he's a big goose hunter and really has a passion for shooting that big, heavy 10 gauge. And so you get to hear him talk about that. And that's just a cool aspect of hunting, the various guns that Phil talks about on those shows. And I've also got some hunting tips, some freelancing tips from some of our contributors to the magazine that are going to bring in some different ideas. And I'm excited about it. And I'm, excited to get back into the fall, just like every duck hunter out there. But I'm also excited to hear about a lot of the science content that you're going to bring to the table. One thing I did want to mention is, we've been doing these, especially from home, the technical difficulties that we've had. But even season 1, we didn't really have a dedicated area for our podcast recording. And Clay Baird, our producer, has finally gotten approval for building us a studio. So we will actually have a designated podcast studio. Now, granted, current social distancing regulations in place, that may be limited use, but we're excited to have a studio. We're excited to have something that we can actually show, maybe provide some images of us and, the processes of how we do this. I think that'll be a different aspect of of parts of season 3 that people may see on some of DU's social channels. We've also got some new potential hosts. We're going to kind of spread that out a little bit and have, a featured host who's going to bring, and we'll introduce that new host in the near future, but it's going to bring some more DU historical, some DU news, some organizational information that I think is important to get out there as far as the podcast. But no, I mean, we're rocking right along and recording season 3. We're getting ready for it. We're continuing to check that feedback. So if any of our listeners have anything that they want to see in season 3, go ahead and email us at the DU podcast at ducks.org. You can visit ducks.org/DU podcast for information on other places to download as we get closer and closer to season 3. If you want to support the Ducks Unlimited podcast, be sure to subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcast, which it's available on a wide range of different platforms. I also ask if you do subscribe and rate and review. That is very beneficial for the DU podcast. You can share it on social media, share it with your friends. You can even share it with Mike and I on social media platforms. We talk to each other about it all the time. So get out there, support the Ducks Unlimited podcast, and we greatly appreciate it.
All right.
But no, Mike, we're rolling right along, and it's exciting. And thanks for joining me today. We're going to wrap this wrap-up show up, and we're going to go ahead and get ready for season 3.
Hey, before we end, remind me, you might have said this at the beginning. When is season 3 starting? When do I need to, what kind of planning do I need to do here?
You better start planning because we are starting September 1.
September 1. So right in time for teal season. That'll be about 2 weeks. Well, it'll actually be the start of waterfowl season up in Canada for those for Canadian residents, right? Yeah. So, all right. Well, I will put all of our state waterfowl biologist friends on notice and let them make them aware that we're going to be reconnecting with them to give their periodic updates about what they're seeing from surveys and hunter reports and all that kind of. We're going to continue to do that. So, all right, I'll get to work. I'll start planning.
All right. Thanks a lot, Mike.
Thank you, Chris.
I'd like to thank my co-host, Dr. Mike Brasher, for joining me on this show and doing a fantastic job of putting all of his efforts into bringing some really, really fundamental science information to the show. I'd like to thank Clay Baird for doing a fantastic job putting the show together. And I'd like to thank you, the listener, for joining us on Season 2 and looking forward to Season 3. Also, thanks for supporting wetlands conservation.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the DU Podcast. Be sure to rate, review, and subscribe to the show and visit www.ducks.org/DU Podcast for resources based on today's topics, as well as access to more episodes. Opinions expressed by guests do not necessarily reflect those of Ducks Unlimited. Until next time, stay tuned to the Ducks.